It was a warm evening in the city, and the streets were busy with people heading home from work, grabbing dinner, or just enjoying the night air. Among them was Maya Carter, a well-dressed woman in her mid-30s, walking toward her parked car. She had just finished a long meeting at a high-end restaurant downtown. Maya wasn't just anyone. She was a highly respected lawyer known for fighting civil rights cases. But at this moment, she was just another person heading home after a long day. As she reached for her car keys, she noticed flashing lights reflecting off the glass windows of a nearby store. A police car had pulled up a few feet away. She didn't pay much attention at first. Police officers were always around the city, handling different situations. But then she heard a loud voice calling out, "Hey, you, stop right there." Maya turned her head slightly, unsure if the voice was meant for her. A tall police officer, Officer Bradley, was walking quickly toward her, his hand resting near his utility belt. His face was tense, and his eyes were locked on her. Confused, Maya paused and looked around. Was he talking to someone else? The sidewalk was not too crowded, but a few people nearby also seemed confused. Before she could say anything, the officer's voice came again, sharper this time. "I said, stop right there." Maya held up her hand slightly, a gesture of confusion more than anything else. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, keeping her voice calm. Officer Bradley stopped a few feet away from her, his stance firm. "Step away from the vehicle," he ordered. "Put your hands where I can see them." Maya blinked in disbelief. "Excuse me, this is my car," she said, gesturing toward the sleek black sedan parked beside her. The officer didn't seem to hear her. Instead, he spoke into his radio. "I've got a suspect matching the description. Black female, dark business suit, near the parking lot on Maple Street." Maya felt a strange chill run down her spine. Suspect. Description. What was he talking about? She had done nothing wrong. She had just finished a business meeting and was heading home. "Officer, there must be some mistake," she tried to explain. "I'm Maya Carter. I'm a lawyer. I just had dinner at—" "Keep your hands visible," he interrupted, his hand now gripping something on his belt. A small crowd was beginning to form at a distance, people watching the situation unfold. A few murmurs spread among them. Some pulled out their phones, sensing that something was wrong. Maya took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. She had handled many cases of mistaken identity and wrongful accusations in court, but now she was living one herself. "Please," she said again, choosing her words carefully. "I don't know what you think is happening, but I can show you my ID. Just let me reach for my bag." "Don't move," the officer shouted. Maya froze in place. The tension was thick in the air. She could see the officer's grip tightening. Something was terribly wrong, and she had no idea how it had come to this. And then, just as she was about to speak again, something unexpected happened, something that would change the course of the night entirely. Maya stood completely still, her heart pounding in her chest. The street, which had been filled with the usual city noise just moments ago, now felt strangely silent. The people watching held their breath, unsure of what would happen next. Some had their phones up, recording. Others whispered among themselves, exchanging looks of concern. Officer Bradley's grip on his belt tightened. His eyes were sharp, focused. It was clear he believed he was dealing with a dangerous suspect. But Maya couldn't understand why. She forced herself to stay calm. Panicking wouldn't help. Raising her voice wouldn't help. She knew this from years of working in courtrooms. She had defended people in situations like this before. But now, standing in their shoes, she felt a new kind of fear, one she had never imagined she would experience herself. "Officer," she tried again, her voice steady but firm. "Please listen to me. I am not who you think I am. I can prove it. Just let me get my ID from my bag." Bradley didn't move for a second. He seemed to be thinking, his eyes scanning her as if trying to decide if she was telling the truth. But before he could respond, another voice cut through the tension. "Hey man, that's Maya Carter." A young man from the crowd had stepped forward slightly, pointing at her. He was holding up his phone, and his voice was filled with urgency. "She's a lawyer. You don't know who she is." Maya felt a flicker of relief. Someone recognized her. Maybe this would help clear things up. But Bradley barely reacted. If anything, his stance became more rigid. He glanced at the young man but didn't lower his guard. "Step back," he ordered the bystanders, his voice sharp. "This is a police matter." Maya swallowed hard. It was clear that just saying her name wasn't going to be enough. She needed to convince him to listen. To really listen. "Officer," she said again, her voice calm but urgent. "Check my license. Check my registration. Call my office if you need to. I'm not resisting. I just want to clear this up." Bradley's radio crackled to life. A voice came through, giving some kind of update. He lifted the radio to his mouth and responded with short, clipped words. Then he turned back to her, eyes still cautious. "You fit the description of a suspect we're looking for," he said. "A woman wearing dark clothing was reported leaving the scene of a robbery a few blocks from here." Maya's eyes widened in disbelief. A robbery. This was worse than she thought. How could anyone mistake her for a thief? She had just left a restaurant where half the people knew who she was. "That's impossible," she said. "I've been in a meeting for the past 2 hours. I have witnesses. There must be a mistake." But before she could say anything more, another police car pulled up. The door swung open and a second officer stepped out. He was older, with a calmer presence. His name tag read Lieutenant Harris. He took one look at the situation, then at Maya. His expression shifted slightly, recognition flashing in his eyes. "Maya Carter," he said, his tone different from Bradley's. There was hesitation, as if he was realizing something wasn't right. Maya turned toward him, relief washing over her. Finally, someone who might actually listen. "Yes," she said quickly. "That's me. I'm a lawyer. I just left a business dinner. There's been a mistake." Harris glanced at Bradley, then at the growing crowd. It was clear that people were watching closely, waiting to see how this would play out. "Bradley," Harris said in a lower voice, "let's confirm her identity before we do anything else." Maya held her breath. Maybe, just maybe, things were about to take a turn in the right direction. But something told her this wasn't over yet. Maya let out a slow breath, hoping that Lieutenant Harris would handle the situation differently. He seemed more experienced, more aware of what was happening. The crowd had grown larger, with people whispering, watching closely, and recording on their phones. The tension in the air was thick, and Maya could feel every second stretching longer than it should. Lieutenant Harris turned to Officer Bradley, lowering his voice slightly but keeping it firm. "Did you check her ID?" he asked. Bradley hesitated, shifting slightly. "She wouldn't keep her hands where I could see them," he said. "I told her not to move." Maya felt frustration rise in her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. "I offered to show my ID," she said. "It's in my bag. You can take it out yourself if you don't want me to move." Harris studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Let's do that." Bradley still looked unsure, but he slowly stepped forward, eyes watching her every move. "Where is it?" he asked. "In the side pocket," Maya replied, keeping her hands visible. Bradley reached into her bag and pulled out her wallet. He opened it and pulled out her driver's license. His eyes scanned the name, and for the first time, he hesitated. It was clear that he recognized the name now. Lieutenant Harris took the license from him, reading it himself. He let out a quiet sigh before looking at Maya. "Maya Carter," he said, his voice now more measured. "I've heard your name before." Maya nodded, relief slowly creeping in. "Yes, and if you check my business card in that same pocket, you'll see exactly where I work." Bradley flipped through the wallet and pulled out a sleek business card. His face stiffened as he read the words printed on it: Carter and Associates, Civil Rights Attorney. For a moment, He didn't say anything. It was clear that he understood now. This wasn't just some random person. This was a well-known lawyer who had handled many high-profile cases involving situations just like this one. The weight of the moment settled over the officers. The crowd had grown quieter now, waiting to see what would happen next. Some people had already guessed what was happening, that this was a case of mistaken identity. But for Maya, it was more than that. It was about how quickly someone could be treated unfairly, no matter who they were. Lieutenant Harris handed her license back to her. "Miss Carter, I apologize for the confusion," he said. His tone was professional, but there was something else in his eyes, something that looked like regret. Maya took her ID and placed it back in her wallet. "Apologies don't change what just happened," she said, her voice calm but firm. "You assumed I was a suspect before even asking me a single question." Harris didn't argue. He simply nodded. "You're right, and I'll be filing a report on this interaction." Bradley, however, still looked tense. He wasn't used to being questioned, especially not in front of so many people. He shifted on his feet and muttered, "I was just doing my job." Maya turned to him, meeting his eyes directly. "Your job is to protect and serve. That includes treating people fairly. You didn't even listen to me." Bradley looked away, saying nothing. The crowd, sensing that the situation was ending, started to disperse. Some people shook their heads. Others whispered among themselves about what had just happened. A few, still holding their phones up, recorded Maya as she stood her ground. Harris turned back to Maya. "Would you like to file a complaint?" Maya thought for a moment. She had handled so many cases like this, seen so many people go through it. But now that it had happened to her, she felt something deeper, something that she knew she had to address. She took a deep breath. "I'll be taking the right steps," she said. "Trust me on that." And with that, she turned and walked toward her car, leaving behind an officer who had just learned a lesson he wouldn't forget. Maya sat in her car for a few moments before starting the engine. Her hands rested on the steering wheel, but she didn't drive off right away. Instead, she took a deep breath, letting the events of the past few minutes settle in her mind. It wasn't the first time she had seen unfair treatment up close, but this time she had lived it. The weight of it sat heavy on her chest. She glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the two officers still standing there. Lieutenant Harris seemed to be saying something to Officer Bradley, who nodded stiffly. The situation was technically over, but Maya knew that the real conversation was just beginning. Finally, she pulled out of the parking spot and drove off. The city lights blurred past her, but her mind stayed sharp, replaying everything that had happened. A part of her wanted to let it go, to go home, take a deep breath, and move on. But another part of her, the lawyer inside her, knew that this couldn't be ignored. By the time she reached her apartment, her phone was already buzzing with messages. News spread fast, especially in the age of social media. A few friends had already sent her links to videos of the incident, which had been uploaded online. "Maya, is this you? What happened?" One text read, "Unbelievable. I just saw the video. Are you okay?" Another asked. Maya sighed and placed her phone on the table. She wasn't surprised that people were talking about it. After all, she had seen similar videos before. Videos of people being stopped unfairly, being judged before they had a chance to speak. And now her face was part of one of those stories. She sat down on her couch, deep in thought. What should she do next? She had spent years fighting cases just like this. People came to her because they trusted her to stand up for them when no one else would. And now she had to ask herself, how would she handle her own situation? She opened her laptop and began typing. Her fingers moved quickly over the keyboard as she wrote down every detail she could remember. She knew how important it was to document everything while it was still fresh in her mind. The officer's words, the way he had looked at her, the way he had assumed she was guilty before she even spoke. She saved the document and leaned back in her chair. The frustration was still there, but now it had a purpose. She had been given a platform, an opportunity to speak not just for herself, but for others who had gone through the same thing and never had their voices heard. Her phone rang. It was Daniel, her closest friend and a fellow lawyer. "Maya," he said the moment she picked up. "I just saw the video." "I figured you would," she replied. "Are you okay?" he asked. His voice was filled with concern. "I'm fine," she said, "but I'm not letting this slide." "I didn't think you would," Daniel said. "Listen, you know this is going to blow up, right? People are already talking about it online. News outlets are picking it up." Maya sighed. "I know, but this isn't just about me. This happens to people all the time. I've represented so many clients who have gone through this. And now, it's personal." Daniel was silent for a moment. Then he said, "So, what's the plan?" Maya took a deep breath. "First, I'm filing a formal complaint against Officer Bradley. Then, I want to speak out. People need to know that this isn't just a headline. It's real life. And if this can happen to me, a lawyer, imagine what happens to people who don't have a voice." Daniel didn't hesitate. "I'm with you. Whatever you need, just say the word." Maya felt a small smile form on her lips. She knew she wasn't alone in this. "Thanks, Daniel. I'll keep you updated." After hanging up, she checked her emails. Sure enough, several news organizations had already reached out, asking for a statement. She knew that by morning, this would be everywhere. She closed her laptop and leaned back on the couch, staring at the ceiling. This wasn't how she had planned to spend her night. But maybe, just maybe, this was something bigger than just one bad encounter. Maybe this was a chance to make real change. She didn't know exactly what would happen next, but one thing was certain: this was far from over. The next morning, Maya woke up to the sound of her phone buzzing nonstop. The sunlight streamed through her window, but she barely had time to enjoy the peaceful morning. She reached for her phone and saw dozens of missed calls, text messages, and emails. The news had spread. She scrolled through her messages. Friends, family, and colleagues had all reached out. Some were checking on her, while others were already discussing the impact of what had happened. A few of her fellow lawyers had sent supportive messages, offering their help. One message caught her attention. It was from a reporter at a major news station, asking if she would be willing to do an interview. She wasn't surprised. Videos of the incident had already gone viral overnight. People were talking about it on social media, debating whether what had happened was fair or not. Maya sighed. She knew she had to respond, but first she needed to gather her thoughts. She got up, made herself a cup of coffee, and sat at her dining table. She opened her laptop and clicked on one of the news articles that had been published about her incident. The headline read, "Respected civil rights lawyer mistaken for suspect by police. Public outrage grows." She scrolled down and saw the comments. Some people were angry on her behalf, calling for accountability. Others were debating whether the officer had just been doing his job. And of course, there were people saying she should have just complied, as if that would have made a difference. Maya took a deep breath. She had spent her entire career fighting cases like this, but now she was in the center of one. She knew she had a choice. She could either let this moment pass, or she could use it to spark a real conversation. Her decision was made. She picked up her phone and called Daniel. He answered on the first ring. "Maya, I was just about to call you," he said. "This thing is getting bigger than we thought." "I know," she said. "That's why I'm going to speak out. I want to do the interview." Daniel didn't sound surprised. "I figured you would. But we need to be smart about this. You know how these things go. Some people will try to twist your words." Maya nodded, even though he couldn't see her. "I know. That's why I want to be clear about my message. This isn't just about me. This is about a system that jumps to conclusions before hearing the facts." Daniel sighed. "I'm with you, Maya. Let's do this right. I'll help set everything up." After hanging up, Maya drafted a short statement for the press. She kept it simple but powerful. "What happened to me is not unique. Too many people are judged before they are even given a chance to speak. I'm speaking out not just for myself, but for everyone who has been in this situation. It's time for change. She posted it on her social media accounts, and within minutes, the response was overwhelming. Hundreds of people liked, shared, and commented. Some shared their own experiences. Others thanked her for using her voice. Later that day, she arrived at the news station for her interview. The lights were bright, and the cameras were ready. The anchor greeted her warmly before they went live. "Maya Carter, thank you for joining us today," the anchor began. "You've handled many civil rights cases, but now you're at the center of one. How do you feel about what happened?" Maya took a deep breath before answering. "I feel disappointed but not surprised," she said. "This happens far too often. The only difference is that I have a platform to talk about it." The interview continued, and Maya spoke passionately about the need for better training, for accountability, for change. She wasn't just speaking as a lawyer. She was speaking as someone who had experienced it firsthand. By the time she left the studio, her phone was buzzing again. This time, it wasn't just friends or news outlets. It was organizations, community leaders, and even officials who wanted to discuss solutions. Maya knew this was just the beginning, but she was ready. She had turned her moment of injustice into a movement. As Maya stepped out of the news station, she could already see the impact of her words. People were reaching out, sharing her interview, and commenting on how important the conversation was. It wasn't just about what had happened to her. It was about what had been happening to people for years. She got into her car and sat for a moment, watching as her phone buzzed with more notifications. But one message stood out. It was from a number she didn't recognize. "Ms. Carter, my name is Angela Williams. I saw your interview, and I need your help. My son went through something similar, but no one listened to us. Can we talk?" Maya felt a familiar tightness in her chest. This was exactly why she had spoken out. It wasn't just about her case. It was about all the others that never got attention. She quickly replied, setting up a time to call Angela that evening. Then she drove home, her mind already racing with what needed to be done next. By the time she arrived at her apartment, her phone rang again. It was Lieutenant Harris. She hesitated for a second before answering. "Maya Carter speaking," she said, keeping her tone neutral. "Ms. Carter, it's Lieutenant Harris," he said. "I wanted to follow up about what happened. We've launched an internal review, and Officer Bradley will be questioned about his actions." Maya crossed her arms. "And what does that mean exactly?" "It means there will be a full investigation," Harris said. "I know that may not seem like much, but I want you to know that we take this seriously." Maya appreciated the effort, but she wasn't going to let words replace real action. "Taking it seriously means making real changes, Lieutenant," she said. "How often does this happen without consequences?" Harris was silent for a moment. Then he sighed. "More than it should," he admitted. "I can't change the past, but I want to be part of the solution." Maya appreciated his honesty. "Then let's talk," she said. "Not just about what happened to me, but about how we stop this from happening to others." Harris agreed, and they set up a meeting for later that week. That evening, Maya called Angela Williams, the woman who had messaged her earlier. "Ms. Williams, this is Maya Carter," she said. "Oh, thank you so much for calling," Angela said, her voice shaking slightly. "I saw your interview, and I had to reach out. My son, Jordan, was stopped last year. The officer said he looked suspicious just because he was walking home at night. They accused him of trying to break into houses. He was just a teenager, Maya. He was scared, but they didn't listen." Maya felt her heart sink. She had heard too many stories like this. What happened next? "They arrested him," Angela said. "Charged him with trespassing, even though he was just a few blocks from home. We fought it, but no one took us seriously. The charges were dropped eventually, but the damage was done. My son is still scared to walk outside alone." Maya closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the story. "I want to help," she said. "Let's meet. I want to hear everything." Angela agreed, and they set up a time to talk in person. As Maya hung up, she realized something. This wasn't just about her case anymore. This was about every person who had been unfairly judged, mistreated, or silenced. And she wasn't going to stop until something changed. Maya sat in her office, staring at the file in front of her. It contained everything she had learned about Jordan Williams, Angela's son. As she flipped through the pages, she couldn't help but feel frustrated. His case was one of many, yet it had been ignored, dismissed as just another mistake. She had met with Angela the day before, listening as the mother spoke with pain in her voice. Jordan had once been a confident, happy teenager, but after the incident, he became quiet and withdrawn. He no longer trusted the people who were supposed to protect him. Maya promised Angela that she would do everything in her power to help. Now, she had to figure out how. Her phone rang, breaking her thoughts. It was Daniel. "Maya, did you see the latest news?" he asked. "No. What happened?" she said, turning on her laptop. "They've placed Officer Bradley on temporary leave," Daniel said. "It's all over the news. People are demanding answers." Maya quickly searched online and saw the headlines. The police department had issued a statement saying that Officer Bradley's actions were under review. They claimed they were committed to fairness and accountability. Maya shook her head. "This only happened because people are paying attention," she said. "If there were no video, no outrage, he'd still be on duty like nothing happened." "I know," Daniel said, "but this is an opportunity. People are listening. What's next?" Maya took a deep breath. "I have a meeting with Lieutenant Harris tomorrow. I want to push for real policy changes, not just an apology. And I'm going to bring up Jordan's case too." Daniel agreed. "I'll back you up however you need. Just say the word." After the call, Maya sat back in her chair. She knew that real change didn't happen overnight, but she also knew that momentum was on her side. The next day, she arrived at the police station for her meeting with Lieutenant Harris. As she walked in, she noticed several officers glancing at her. Some looked neutral, others uncomfortable. They all knew why she was there. Harris met her in a private conference room. "Maya, thank you for coming," he said. She nodded and took a seat. "Let's get straight to the point," she said. "I appreciate that Officer Bradley is under review, but that's not enough. We need actual reforms." Harris sighed. "I hear you. And believe it or not, I agree." Maya raised an eyebrow. "Then let's talk about solutions." For the next hour, they discussed possible changes, better training, stricter accountability, and ways to prevent racial bias in policing. Harris admitted that change was needed, but he also warned her that it wouldn't be easy. "There are people who resist change, Maya," he said, "even within the department." "I know," she said, "but that's not an excuse to do nothing." Harris leaned forward. "What do you want from this?" "I want officers to stop making assumptions based on appearance," she said. "I want cases like mine, like Jordan Williams', to stop happening." Harris looked surprised. "Jordan Williams?" "Yes," Maya said firmly. "A teenage boy who was arrested for simply walking home. His case may not have made headlines, but it matters, and I won't let it be ignored." Harris sighed again, but this time he nodded. "Let me look into it," he said. "I won't make promises, but I'll see what I can do." Maya knew that was as much as she could give for now, but she wasn't stopping here. After the meeting, she stepped outside and checked her phone. More messages, more people reaching out. The movement was growing. And Maya was ready to take it to the next level. Maya sat in her office, looking out of the window. The city outside was busy as always, cars honking, people rushing to their destinations. But for Maya, the past few days had been different. Everything had changed. Her phone buzzed. Another news report. Another message from someone sharing their story. The momentum hadn't slowed down. It had grown stronger. The people weren't letting this issue fade. and neither was she. She took a deep breath and opened her laptop. In front of her was a draft of a legal proposal she had been working on with Daniel and a few other lawyers. It outlined the need for stricter policies in handling cases like hers and Jordan Williams'. If approved, it would require officers to undergo new training, use body cameras at all times, and be held accountable for wrongful actions. But she knew writing a proposal wasn't enough. Action was needed. Her phone rang. It was Angela Williams. "Maya, I just wanted to say thank you," Angela said. Her voice sounded lighter than before. "Ever since you spoke up, people are finally listening. Someone from the police department even called me today to discuss Jordan's case." "That's a step in the right direction," Maya said, smiling. "Jordan saw your interview," Angela continued. "For the first time in a long time, he believes something can change." Maya felt a wave of emotion. This was why she fought. Not just for herself, but for people like Jordan. Later that afternoon, she met with Daniel and a few other community leaders. They gathered in a small conference room, stacks of papers spread across the table. The atmosphere was serious, but hopeful. "We have a chance here," Daniel said. "The public is watching. We can't let this moment pass without making real changes." Maya nodded. "We need to take this to city officials. We need their commitment." Over the next few days, they organized meetings with government representatives, civil rights groups, and law enforcement officials. The conversations were tough. Some people resisted, saying things like, "These incidents are rare," or "Most officers do their jobs correctly." But Maya didn't back down. She shared her story. She shared Jordan's story. She shared the countless other cases that had been ignored for too long. One by one, people started listening. A week later, Lieutenant Harris called her. "Maya," he said, "I have news. Officer Bradley has been officially suspended while the investigation continues." And he hesitated. "And what?" she asked. "The department is agreeing to new training policies," Harris said. "It's not everything, but it's a start." Maya let out a slow breath. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. "Thank you, Lieutenant," she said. "No," he replied. "Thank you for not giving up." A few days later, Maya stood at a podium in front of a crowd. Reporters, community members, and activists had gathered. Cameras flashed. Microphones pointed toward her. She took a deep breath and spoke. "What happened to me should never have happened," she said. "What happened to Jordan Williams should never have happened. And yet these stories are far too common." She looked around at the faces in the crowd. Some were angry. Some were hopeful. All were listening. "But today we took a step forward," she continued. "Because when we speak out, when we demand change, people listen. And we will not stop until justice is not just a word, but a reality." The crowd erupted in applause. Maya stepped back, feeling a sense of purpose stronger than ever before.